Welcome to the Trinity Health IHA Medical Group Wednesday Wellness Series. So this month we're celebrating Heart Month. And the presentation tonight is titled Lifestyle Changes for a Healthy Heart. Our presenters this evening are physicians Frank Smith and Paul Nona. Both are cardiologists for Trinity Health Michigan Heart, practicing mainly in Livonia and Brighton. And our third presenter is Hannah Chumley, the registered dietitian for outpatient intensive cardiac rehabilitation at the Livingston location. And Dr. Smith, I believe you're going to be kicking it off for us this evening.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. And we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming virtually here to join us on this winter night, or spring night, I guess, really, I should say. We're going to try to go through some lifestyle changes that you can apply to improve your heart function and to perhaps even correct problems that you have with your heart. We have many different options that we can use in terms of treatment for cardiac disease. We're going to talk about one that you have control over with, and that's lifestyle medicine. This is a long definition of what lifestyle medicine is, but basically it uses a whole food plant-based diet, at least as much as each patient can allow themselves to participate with. And I highlighted at the end, it's used to not just treat, but it's also can be used to prevent and often reverse chronic disease. Now, lifestyle changes are really, I feel, the single best medicine for your heart. And most importantly, you're in charge, and there are no extra costs or side effects. So let's talk about this. Now, this is a chart that you've all probably seen somewhere or the other. It's the usual bar graph showing the causes of death in the United States. And it's sort of useful. Doesn't really tell me what I should be doing to avoid any of these categories. However, I guess what it's telling me is I don't want to have heart disease, cancer, COVID, accidents, or a stroke. But that doesn't really help me modify my behavior. A better chart is the conditions that are causing these deaths in the United States. Here are the top 8 ones. And you can see if you go down the list that 7 out of 8, maybe even 8 out of 8, if you count kidney, are lifestyle related. And this is what actually happens in the primary care office. About 80% of conditions seen by primary care physicians are lifestyle related and can be modified, treated, or even cured by lifestyle measures. So this is the so-called 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. There's an American College of Lifestyle Medicine, of which I'm a member, a board certified member, and these are the way they divide things up. They have these 6 pillars, which are listed there for you to read, and we're going to go through very briefly in a very high-level view 5 out of those 6. I'm not going to really talk about the risky substances because I can summarize that in 2 words: don't smoke. So we'll leave that alone. I'm happy to answer more specific questions, and I'm sure Dr. Nona is also on that. But we're going to go through the other 5 in a brief fashion. I want to point out that in our intensive cardiac rehab program, we essentially use the same pillars, but we call them exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness. They basically dovetail fairly well with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine's 6 pillars that I showed you. Let's talk about healthful eating. Now, Hannah's going to give you a lot more information on this. And by the way, there's the Lifestyle Medicine Department is presenting a course on the 22nd of February, which will give you some very practical dietary tips. So Allison may want to mention that toward the end of the presentation to remind you of that. So from putting it into practice, you may want to tune into that one on February 22nd. Here's obesity from the top left in 91 to the bottom right. And you can see what's happened. The country's gotten redder, and redder is just a code for not Democrats or Republicans, just a code for percentage of patients that are overweight, defined as a body mass index above 30. Right now, Michigan is got the dubious distinction of being number 8 in that list, behind mostly all southern states. It's the number 1 northern state in obesity, running about 36 to 37% of the population obese. Now, we can look at dietary stuff and get into all of this sort of analysis. It's way too complicated. A lot of things happen on the left that go into your body and do things on the right, but we really need to simplify this. This is, in my opinion, no practical value to you in making changes. This is a little bit better. It kind of shows the benefits of certain things on the top in blue and the harm of things certain on the bottom in red, but it's still not really a practical approach. So how do you get a practical approach? Well, you avoid the isolated nutrient fixation. That is to say, don't get fixed on how much magnesium you're taking or how much potassium you're taking or how much fat you're taking and so on and so on. You look at a dietary pattern. This is just an example on the top of a low-fat diet, which really didn't do anything in terms of reducing the hazard of coronary heart disease compared to usual care. Whereas on the bottom is a dietary pattern. It's actually the Mediterranean diet. And you can see that it definitely reduced the hazard of death or cardiovascular disease compared to the controlled diet. So you want to focus on dietary patterns. And this is very practical because you can go to a place like US News and World Report and don't worry about the URL there. Just Google US News World Report best diet or something like that, and you'll get right to it. And you can see it's actually a very, very good site. It has over 42 or 43 diets, and it goes over them in great detail, gives you examples, gives you recipes. The number one diet, according to this poll over the last 11 years, has been the Mediterranean diet, followed closely by the DASH diet. It's a diet used initially to fight high blood pressure, and then the flexitarian diet, which is basically a plant-based diet with a little bit of meat to oversimplify. The bottom line is a whole food plant-based approach is what you should be using, whatever diet you choose. But the Mediterranean diet is number one overall and number one for heart disease. So this is what happens when you use a dietary pattern. This is basically a Mediterranean diet in the blue triangles. And you can see what happens on to the bad cholesterol, to the bad and good ratio, and to measures of inflammation. They go right down within 2 to 4 weeks. The red is a statin drug. So basically what this is showing is you get the same response in the same time frame and the same magnitude as taking a statin by using a plant-based diet. Pay attention to the far left column here. This is what happens when you use a Mediterranean diet. You get a 25% reduction in death from any cause, a third reduction in death from coronary heart disease, and actually 24% reduction in cancer. I would mention in passing that everything I say here about heart can be equally applied to cancer, can be applied to inflammatory bowel disease, can be applied to arthritis, will help all of those things and more. Taste for breakfast, I just threw this slide in because I always get a question on this, whether we should eat breakfast. In terms of the vertical black line in the middle here, anything to the right of this is increased risk. And you can see that if you never eat breakfast in terms of cardiovascular disease, you have an 87% increase in your risk of death. In terms of stroke, you have a 340% increase in risk if you don't eat breakfast. So the moral of this slide is probably want to eat breakfast. This is former American College of Cardiology president, Dr. Kim Williams, from the Detroit area. His quote is that there are two kinds of cardiologists, vegans and those who haven't read the data. So that probably summarizes how most cardiologists feel about this. Talking about switching gears for a minute, talking about physical activity in America, there's all sorts of things going on that are good. There's some things that are not so good. Cardiologists are not immune to this. I have this photograph from, it was a couple of years ago, American College of Cardiology National Meeting. We have the cardiologist on the escalator on the left, and we have the cardiologist on the stairs on the right. And I think you can see the difference between the two. The health benefits of exercise is that it does all these things, relaxes and opens your arteries and improves basically every one of your cardiac risk factors, no matter what you got. In fact, you can actually eliminate type 2 diabetes with a lifestyle medicine approach. It also has anti-inflammatory actions. It decreases chemicals that produce inflammation of arteries and decrease blood clots and reduces irregular heart rhythms. It also improves blood flow to the heart, so you get a reduction in chest pain as well. Here's the effects of cardiac rehab on mortality rates. The vertical axis shows the proportion of patients that are no longer proportion of patients that are still alive. And so you can see with cardiac rehab at the end of 10 years, about 80% of the patients are still alive, where if you don't have cardiac rehab, this is after a cardiac event, probably about 30% are still alive. The right panel just shows that it doesn't really make any difference whether you're a man, woman, old, young, smoker, non-smoker, diabetic, whatever. It applies to everybody. It doesn't make any difference what underlying conditions you have. Exercise works. Here's an example of physical activity with both men in the red and women in the green. And what I want you to notice about this, it's not surprising that is the low activity on the right, number 1, has a higher risk of death than the higher activity, number 5 on the right. But what I want you to notice how quickly it changes. Just between 1 and 2, the risk drops dramatically. So what this slide, you should take from this slide is, you don't have to do a lot. You just have to do something. And it doesn't take much to make that drop to get into the number 2 fitness level. Here's another way of looking at it. On the left is vigorous exercise and the same risk, same activity things, 1 being low and 5 being high. And then on the right is walking. Now, I don't know about you, there is a slight difference between the 2 graphs, but I can't really see a huge difference between them. The walking, again, rapid dropping off of risk with very low levels of activity. So you don't have to necessarily, you can do vigorous exercise, it has a lot of benefits for you, but you don't have to. Walking will work fine. So the bottom line is any amount of physical activity yields better benefits and is better than none. 2 hours a day standing, 10% decrease in mortality. 5 to 8 hours a day standing, 15%. More than 8 hours, 24%. So you can pick what you want to do, but any activity is good. Sleep is a topic that's gotten a lot of press recently, and here's the mechanisms of lack of sleep. And if you remember what I showed you about exercise, this is pretty much the reverse of everything that exercise did good. This is what lack of sleep does bad. It's just the same things that I talked about before. I won't read them all to you. You can look at them there. But it does increase weight, by the way, and it does lead to diabetes. This is graph showing risk increasing on this axis here for cardiovascular disease and for coronary heart disease. And you'll notice that anything above this horizontal line is increased risk. So you can see the purple arrow is pointing to kind of a sweet spot there for good sleep quality at about 7 hours. These are adults now. And poor sleep quality about 8 hours. So it seems like 7 to 8 hours for adults is probably the optimal amount of sleep. And obviously, good sleep quality is better than poor sleep quality. You don't have to do a lot of experiments for sleep deprivation. We do one twice a year, every year, and that's called daylight savings time. And I can get into a long spiel about why that's bad for everybody, and maybe we'll do that in the Q&A. But here's the fall where we, the spring, where on the top where we spring forward, which means we lose an hour of sleep. And it happens on Sunday morning, as you know. And by Monday, there's a 24% increase in heart attacks in the spring. Now, converse occurs in the fall. We get an extra hour of sleep on Sunday. And by Tuesday, there's a 21% decrease in heart attacks in the fall. So you can see what and that's a single hour, 1 single hour difference on Sunday. So you can see how important having a stable sleep pattern and adequate sleep is. Here's 6 suggested sleep solutions. Stick to the same sleep schedule. Don't do something different on weekends. Keep your bedroom dark, cool, and as free of screens as you can tolerate. Avoid late in the day caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. They'll interfere with your sleep patterns and greatly decrease your REM sleep. Exercise in bright sun, or in our case in Michigan, light therapy lamps are useful in the morning, and they'll help you sleep better in the evening, but they should be done in the morning, not just before bedtime. And you want to power down and do some kind of relaxing activity 1 hour before bedtime. The last one is this book by Matthew Walker. Some of you may have read this. He's a very easy to read author, a very humorous author. It's a very easy and fun read, and gives you lots of additional information and lots of additional tips on why sleep is so important. I'm going to do the last 2 together here, and that's manage stress and healthy relationships. It's a depressing slide here about depression. About 20 to 40% of patients are depressed after a heart attack, and up to 25% have what we call a major depressive disorder. That's one that usually requires therapy with either cognitive behavior therapy or antidepressants. Untreated, if you have depression after a heart attack, it's chronic, it's not going to go away. and it increases your mortality risk after you have the heart attack, if it wasn't bad enough already, by 4 to 6 times. This is a study they did with 552 patients. They followed them over 5 years. They found that depressed patients who actually did complete cardiac rehab had a 73% lower mortality, and patients who remained depressed post-cardiac rehab had a 4 times higher mortality than non-depressed patients. Didn't really correlate with activity levels in cardiac rehab. It was just going through cardiac rehab. So there was probably a good measure of social support involved in this. This is just the same graph showing before and after how the depression decreases, on the left panel, and showing that if you remain depressed, you have basically what I just said, a 4 times higher mortality on the right panel. Exercise helps by less destruction of cells, lowers your adrenaline, lowers your cortisol, the arteries enlarge, so they get better blood supply to the organs, and there's less inflammation. So this was a cardiac rehab study. And what they did is they just did cardiac rehab, but they included classes in stress management like we do in our intensive cardiac rehab program. And then they looked at outcomes. So here are the 3 lines. These are the percent that are free of the clinical events. You look at the top line, which is the cardiac rehab plus the stress management. That would be analogous to our intensive cardiac rehab program. And then you look at the middle line, which is cardiac rehab, which does help, and then no cardiac rehab. So the difference is about 80% free with the stress management, 60% free of clinical events with cardiac rehab, and only 30% free if you have no cardiac rehab with the stress, without any stress management or exercise. Social support, these graphs show on the red line the incidence of coronary cardiovascular disease with people that are not supported, that's the red line, versus people that do have social support. And then on the right panel, social isolation, where you're not isolated in the dotted line and where you're isolated in the red line. And basically it comes down to you're 42% more likely to develop cardiovascular disease if you have poor social health, defined as those 2 parameters. And you're twice as likely to die over the average 4.5 years of follow-up. Seems worse in smokers, city dwellers, and actually in young older adults. By that I mean 70 to 75-year-old older adults, young older adults. Spirituality, now this is defined as on the bottom, that is to say the needs and expectations which humans have to find meaning, purpose, and value in their life. If you're a spiritual person by that definition, you'll find that you have increased quality of life, increased medication adherence, decreased anxiety, decreased depression, and decreased hospitalization. There's something to be said for the well-examined life. Yoga is also very helpful in this regard. It does all these things, improves your body mass index, that is to say it decreases your weight, and then all the other risk factors that you can see there. Drops your heart rate, you have less adrenaline, it reduces smoking if you're a smoker, obviously, and it reduces depression and anxiety and improves quality of life. Last thing is dog ownership. These are my 2 Samoyeds, one of which is sitting at my feet right now. And in the lower right-hand panel, there's lots of reasons why it works. Increased physical activity, increased time spent outdoors, increased social interactions. But the bottom line is studies have shown that you get about 20% reduction in death and about a 31% reduction in cardiovascular death just by owning a dog. So in summary, these are my advice points. Aim toward adoption of a whole food plant-based diet. Doesn't mean you have to go 100%, although that would be great. Do what you can, make small changes, incremental changes, and work toward that. Exercise, any amount is helpful. Learn about and try suggestions for better sleep. I recommended that book. Don't smoke. And stress reduction, there are multiple methods available, as I tried to show, and cultivate social relationships and spirituality, and perhaps think about a pet. This is a doctor called Caldwell Esselstyn. He's at the Cleveland Clinic. He's a general surgeon, actually, but it's first to show that diet actually changed the structure of coronary arteries, just along with Dean Ornish. One of his quotes, the upper right one, I think is interesting. Stents, bypasses, atherectomy, and drugs are prodigiously expensive, accounting for 45% of Medicare expenses, and are a stopgap patch job, offering no hope of disease resolution. Now, don't get me wrong. Having an angioplasty to stop a heart attack is a life-saving endeavor, and we should always have our patients available to benefit from these life-saving measures. But if you're looking to actually treat in the sense of curing the disease process, Dr. Esselstyn is saying correctly that none of these will actually cure the underlying disease. On the other hand, lifestyle changes will, and they're, as I said, the single best medicine. And again, you're in charge and there's no extra costs or side effects. So we're going to stop there. I have some suggested references, but I think we'll put them up at the end because I'd like to stop here and move ahead with Hannah's nutrition presentation. I think you're going to learn a lot more about nutrition from her. Thank you. I'll stop screen sharing now and move ahead.
Hannah, we're not actually hearing the sound. Maybe we stop it and try to start from the beginning. I think maybe it was just loading, I'm hoping. Or you can do your
I unmuted myself, so let me try that.
okay.
Hi, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday.
Perfect.
It's Hannah Chumley, and I'm one of the registered dietitians with our outpatient cardiac rehab program. I work primarily from the living similar patient. Today, we are focusing on some quick and easy dinner ideas. Mainly, we're going to be making a tempeh stir fry today. And I'm going to be adding in a few different options to jazz it up so we can talk about some functional foods, some fermented foods, as well as getting in those nice plentiful servings of veggies and whole grains. What's also really great about this recipe is that it is super quick and easy to make. So it's perfect for one of those busy weeknight meals when maybe we don't really quite feel like cooking. So I'm going to talk about a few products with you that you may not have seen before, and then we're going to jump into this demonstration. So I am making a couple of changes today from what our recipe typically is going to call for our predicant patients. And now if you're unfamiliar with the predicant program, we are focused on intensive cardiac rehab. So quite strict with the sodium requirements, really focusing in a lot on whole grains, fruits and veggies, all those great anti-inflammatory foods. Today I'm going to take it one step further, and we're going to loosen things up a little bit from where we might see them with our predicant patients. So I've made a couple changes to our recipe. One thing that we're going to be using today are these frozen soybeans. So you may see them as mukimame, which is what this package is, or you may see them as edamame. And now these are going to be the fresh soybean. In town, typically you're going to find these in the frozen food section. Now these are a great way to add plant proteins into our meals. I think that they're nice because they're not quite the same texture as regular legumes are. Because you know, some beans can be kind of on the mushy side, which kind of turns people off to them. And soybeans or edamame are nice and typically pretty crisp as well. So also what's nice about these is that you don't have to get them from a can, which can include quite a bit of added sodium, or you don't have to use dried beans either, which can take a very long time to cook. These just go straight from the freezer to whatever you're making. So these are in a steamer bag, so you can just pop these in the microwave and steam as is, have them with a snack. I like to throw them into stir fries and different dishes. I think they pair really well with mushrooms. So this is edamame, like I said, typically in the freezer section at the store. You can get them shelled like this, which is my preference, or you can get them still in the pod. So a lot of appetizers that you're going to see at Japanese restaurants typically are edamame still in the pod. They are typically coated in salt, so beware of that. Now, another thing that I'm going to be using today that may be a new ingredient for you all is called miso paste. So what's awesome about miso is that it is a fermented food. So we get a lot of excellent benefits from fermented foods. Now, typically, I don't use these with my patients because they are a little higher in sodium, but there's still many great nutritional benefits regardless of the sodium content. So we just want to be careful on those amounts and how much we're using at a given time. there's a few different types of miso. You can see my package is completely in Japanese. So I do get mine from the Asian market. They do have them at Meijer, locally in town, sometimes at Kroger too. You just kind of have to look and get lucky. If not, I know you can order them from Amazon, or you can always go to your local Asian market. So this is going to be a white miso paste. There are a few different kinds. White miso is my personal favorite. It's a little more mild. It's a little bit more sweet. So a lot of those fermented foods, think of like sauerkraut or kimchi, are going to have very pronounced flavors due to that fermentation process. Miso is not quite fermented as long as our other ones. So the white miso specifically is not fermented quite as long as our other miso products. So that's why it has that little bit sweeter taste to it, not quite as pronounced. So white is my favorite. There's also red miso, which has a longer fermentation process. It's going to not be quite as sweet. It is going to have a much more pronounced flavor. So typically, if you're at a Japanese restaurant, for example, and you get that bowl of miso soup in the beginning with the pieces of seaweed and the tofu in it, that's probably going to be a white miso made with a dashi stock, which is a Japanese style of stock. So great thing to start adding into our different recipes. Great with these kinds of stir fries. You can also use it as a rub for like fish and chicken. Lots of great recipes online using miso paste. Again, just be mindful of how much you're using because of the sodium content. Another product that we're going to be using today, you can see over here to my right, we're going to be using tempeh. So that might be another new product for you. Tempeh is fermented soybeans. So another fermented product that we're having today. I hope you can tell that I'm a big fan of fermented functional foods. They're great for our gut microbiome, do a lot of great things for us. So tempeh, this is, I cut it up into blocks. It is a compressed fermented block of soybeans. So we get a lot of great benefits from the soy, a lot of great benefits from the fermentation. Now, if you've tried tofu before, you may not be a fan of that because for me anyway, is the texture. I'm not a huge fan of that texture, but tempeh is still the whole bean. So it has a much firmer, meatier texture than tofu does. I have steamed this prior to where we are right now. So it is a little bit smaller when it first comes out of the package, but I do like to steam it to kind of loosen things up because it can be a little bit on the dry side if you don't do that. Now, locally in Howell, I find the Light Life brand most often. You can find it definitely at Kroger, definitely at Meijer as well. They do have a couple different types, so I typically use the plain regular one. They also have a buffalo flavored one, which is going to have quite a bit more sodium in it than the regular one does. I also saw tempeh bacon the other day, which again has quite a bit of sodium in it. So watch out for those flavored meat alternative products. Now, the last thing I really want to talk about today are these buckwheat noodles or soba noodles. So a lot of great things about soba noodles. My personal favorite is that they cook in 4 minutes and they're ready to go very quickly, very easily. Now, they are also going to be a gluten-free whole grain option. And I like to say it like that because many of our gluten-free noodles and gluten-free breads are highly processed foods that have very little nutritional value. So it's important, even when we have a gluten-free diet, it's even more so important to make sure we're still including whole grains in our diet, because we get a lot of great benefits from whole grains, a lot of vitamins, minerals, healthy fats, polyphenols, and of course the fiber. So these are another Japanese style of noodle. You can find soba definitely at Meijer, hit or miss at Kroger, but again, definitely at an Asian market. And there's a couple different types. So we can do that. We can also serve this with brown rice noodles, just over even over quinoa, whatever your favorite whole grain is. This is going to be a great topic for that. So I've talked enough. Now we're going to go ahead and get started cooking. The first thing that I'm going to do today is I'm going to use a water saute. So traditionally, or typically, our stir fries are used made using oil at a very high temperature. We are going to keep the high temperature aspect today, but to make it more heart healthy by cutting back on those oils, we are going to use a water saute today. So this is one of my favorite techniques. You just cover the bottom of your pan with water, and to turn it on high or a medium high, whatever you're more comfortable with. So I like to do this instead of using the cooking sprays a lot of the time because they tend to burn things with cooking spray, and it's much harder to burn things when you cook them in water. So we're going to let this heat up, same as we would with any kind of oil that we were preheating for a regular stir fry. And then we're going to add in our veggies to this. So while we're waiting for this, we're going to make the marinade for our tempeh. Whereas tofu doesn't really taste like anything, tempeh does have a slight taste to it, again, because it is a fermented food. So to kind of cover up that taste a little bit, we are going to make a marinade, and we're going to soak our tempeh in a marinade for just a few minutes before we add it in to our pot today. So we're going to make a much healthier marinade than what is typically seen for those different Asian style foods. We're going to be basing this with rice vinegar instead of basing it on soy sauce, because soy sauce has an astronomical amount of sodium in it per serving. So this rice vinegar is one of my personal favorites. I keep it at home all the time. It's one of my staple vinegars. It has a nice mellow flavor to it because a lot of vinegar really tends to overpower what you're putting it in. So this one is nice and mellow. I am using the natural rice vinegar today, the Nakano rice vinegar, sorry. So they do have a few different flavors of this as well. But again, we want to be careful with what we're choosing because this one is natural. It doesn't have those flavorings. It also doesn't have the sodium. The other versions have quite a bit of sodium to them. All right, next I'm going to add a little bit of apple juice concentrate. So this is frozen apple juice concentrate from the regular freezer section with the frozen fruit. And I'm going to add this in for a little bit of sweetness. This is one of our favorite tricks that we do with our patients, add sweetness without adding any extra sugar. Because added sugars do cause quite a bit of inflammation in the body, which is what we're trying to reduce. So we added that, that's a natural sugar, not very much. Again, a lot of our Asian style dishes with sauces in them tend to use honey or molasses or brown sugar, and they can be surprisingly high in added sugars. We're going to add in a little bit of reduced sodium soy sauce today. Now this is one that we want to be careful with, even if it's reduced sodium, because reduced sodium really just means 25% or more less than the original version. So that can still be a very high sodium product because the original regular soy sauce has 960 milligrams of sodium per serving, which is a tablespoon. So that can add up very quickly if we're using like half a cup of soy sauce for a marinade or something like that. That's adding in a lot of sodium to our foods. So the lowest I've been able to find is Meyer brand reduced sodium soy sauce. It has 340 milligrams of sodium per serving. So quite a bit better than our original version. Now I'm going to take a quick break and shift gears because my water has preheated all the way. I'm going to add in my veggies. So we're not going to cook these for a very long time, which is the beauty of stir frying. It's very quick, very easy. So this is a picture, this is what our edamame look like. So we're just going to add that into our pan. We're also going to add in some green beans, some snow peas, which I have here. You can use really any kind of vegetable you want for stir fry. It doesn't really matter. Some red bell pepper. I like to make things easier on myself and use the pre-chopped carrots, the ones that are already julienned, ready to go. And then lastly, we're going to add in about a teaspoon of freshly minced ginger. So this again is a personal preference. I love fresh ginger. I think it makes a huge difference flavor-wise over using like a ginger powder or even like a pre-minced ginger from the store, which you can buy. It does take a little extra time to prep that and get it ready. And if you've ever seen ginger root, you know, it's kind of funky looking. It's an odd shape. And for me, when I peel it, I have to be really careful because it's such an odd shape. Because I tend to peel my fingers along with my ginger. So what you can do to avoid that and save your fingers a little bit of extra pain is that you can use just the side of a spoon to peel ginger. It's very quick, very easy, and you don't cut yourself along in the process. So we're going to let these veggies cook for about 3 to 5 minutes, not very long at all. When our snow peas are that nice vibrant green, we know that we're done. Now shifting back to our marinade, I'm gonna add in some freshly minced garlic. Got ginger on the brain, garlic. Really, as much garlic as you want is the right amount. If the recipe calls for, a tablespoon or a teaspoon's probably never going to be enough, to be totally honest. So whatever you want on the garlic. I've added in my miso paste here, which is what this is. Not very much at all, just about a half of a teaspoon. We're also going to add in a little almond butter powder today. So this is going to make it a little bit more Thai inspired than without that. So it's going to give us also a little bit of extra plant protein. Now what's nice about the powdered nut butters is that they have most of the fat removed during that kind of drying and powdering process. So if you really love the flavor of the peanut butter, nut butter products, but you're trying to cut calories or cut back on fat that you're consuming, the powdered nut butters are a great way to go. Because as I said, they have less fat in them. Most of the time, about 90 to 93% less fat than the original. And I'm going to go ahead and give this marinade a stir because we want that miso paste to get broken up before we add in our tempeh. And typically when we add miso, we're not adding it into hot liquid. We're going to dissolve it into cool liquid first and then add it into our pan of hot liquid. So like that, and I'm just going to add in my steamed tempeh and let this marinate for just a few minutes. We are going to add this whole thing into our pot with the veggies in just a few minutes. This is going to become our sauce. So just letting some extra flavor get in there with the tempeh. All right, so our veggies are getting close to done. And now you can, like I said, change up the vegetables that you use for stir fry. A lot of times when I'm making a stir fry, it's just whatever needs to go in the refrigerator. It can be mushrooms, it can be edamame, it can be squash or zucchini or even eggplant sometimes. So what I like to do to really help myself out, if I'm just really tired from work or something like that and I really don't feel like cooking, a lot of times what I will do is I keep a bag of frozen stir-fry vegetables in my freezer, a bag of frozen edamame, and then tempeh optional. You can even throw that in. Just throw that into the skillet, heat it up, and then I've probably got some leftover rice. If not, I'm definitely going to be using my soba noodles because they cook extremely quickly. All right, now that our water has all cooked out, so that's the important thing with a water saute. We want all that water to cook away so it doesn't end up making soggy or too moist of a product. We are going to add in our tempeh and our sauce. Now, before we add in our sauce, we want to turn the heat down to a medium-low, about a 3, because we don't want the sauce to cook off. So we want that to stay in there so we can coat our veggies, coat our noodles in that sauce. I'm going to give this a quick stir, and then we will make our cornstarch slurry, which I know is a very appealing word when we're talking about food. But one way to, again, make things a little bit healthier and also gluten-free is to use cornstarch to thicken our liquids instead of using flour. So you have to use much less cornstarch to thicken liquids, which is going to decrease the calorie content, but also it makes it gluten-free. So a lot of sauces, gravies, those kinds of things, they are thickened with flour. Those are not going to be gluten-free products. So we don't have to add very much cornstarch into this at all. And I'm going to mix this separately. So we're going to use about half of a teaspoon of cornstarch today and a little bit of water. And we're just going to mix this up outside of our pan. So we never add cornstarch to a hot pan. It will just clump up and be impossible to deal with. So we don't want to ruin all of our hard work so far. So mix it up separately in a little bowl or some other kind of measuring cup. And then I like to drizzle it over the back of my spoon when I add it in. So we drizzle it, and this helps prevent clumping. So that's the name of the game whenever you're thickening any liquid, is that you want it to be nice and smooth and not full of lumps. So when we add in our cornstarch slurry, it's going to start thickening up right away. That's why we really want to turn that heat down before we add in the sauce. So we're thickened up. We're going to get that sauce coated all over our veggies. And then we are going to lastly add our soba noodles. Now I have already cooked these, So what you do is you cook them, boil them for 4 minutes, and then you're gonna rinse them off. You can serve soba noodles cold, or you can have them nice and warm. So we're just gonna add this in our pot, get everything nice and mixed up, and then we are ready to serve our tempeh stir fry today. So what we've made today, we've got a very quick, very easy, honestly very cost efficient meal as well. That is whole food based and it is gluten free. So if you did not add the miso paste, it would also be vegan. But you do have to be careful about the type of miso that you buy because it tends to have fish products in it. So with that being said, this is our finished product. One thing that you could do, you could even add more sauce if you wanted to, a little bit, if you're not so concerned about the sodium and all that stuff. But great, it makes quite a bit of food. And that's it. Thanks for joining today. Hi, welcome.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Hannah. So I did hear from a couple people throughout the video that they had some trouble hearing the audio from the video. So if that was you and you did have an issue, I will work with Hannah to attach a link to the video specifically so that you can rewatch any or all of her cooking demo when you receive your email in just a couple days. Okay, are we ready for some questions? Right. So here, since we just are fresh off the cooking demo, Hannah, someone is asking, how long do you steam the tempeh?
Sure, yeah, I really don't steam it that long at all. It's pretty quick, like between 3 to 5 minutes. So just enough to kind of get it fluffed up and not so dry.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we talked about, Dr. Smith, you talked about pets being a great way to lower your risk of heart disease. So I wanted to see, does that include cats?
Actually, yes, there are studies that show that also. I grew up with cats and now for some reason my wife introduced me to dogs, but you can do it either way. It's the bonding with a furry friend, I think, that does it. Yes.
Okay, great. And I've seen some pretty cute guinea pigs too, so I'm sure that
I don't know about that. I have to look into that.
All right, so it looks like we also have a question about exercise. Is there a recommendation for steps per day that should be achieved, or do we look more at minutes? And I'm sure it's based on a few other factors as well.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say the general rule of thumb, you should be shooting for about 10,000 steps a day. You know, a lot of it's just engaging in physical activity. And so if you're averaging around 10,000, I think would be a pretty substantial goal. And I'd be pretty happy with that target.
Okay, sounds good. And is it a certain pace that you should be walking at, or is it just kind of to start off where you're most comfortable?
I think it's starting off where you're comfortable, but then constantly challenging and constantly building up to a more frequent pace. Obviously, each person will have a different, pace goal to be at.
Okay. We talked a lot about sleep and the importance of sleep. So is melatonin something that can be used if you have a hard time actually falling asleep at night?
Yeah, another great question. I find, melatonin is a pretty safe supplement that allows for, some people find that they're able to fall asleep faster. Some people find it effective and some people don't find it effective, but overall it's pretty safe with a very low risk of any interacting with any other medication or side effects.
Okay. And so we have a few people who are talking about asking if they're getting too much sleep at over 9 hours a night, or we have someone who works midnights, sleeps 4 hours after work and 4 hours before. So we're wondering, does that have an impact on health as well if you're splitting it up in 4-hour shifts, or if you're getting too much sleep?
Yeah, I think we'll take one step at a time. So for too much sleep, that's definitely a problem in its own sense. So you'd have to quantify, how much sleep you're getting. I saw some comments about 9 hours of sleep. To me, that falls within the recommendation, so I wouldn't consider that problematic. But it's also not just, the amount of sleep you're getting, it's, what stage of sleep you're getting. How do you feel when you wake up? Do you feel rejuvenated? So there's definitely too much sleep. But in terms of, what that number is, it varies for each person and what's going down, but it's also how do you feel when you wake up from that sleep cycle? In terms of splitting up your sleep, people who have, kind of unusual work hours or different sleep schedules, may find some difficulty. And, there's some data to suggest that if you do have a bad sleep pattern or kind of unusual sleep pattern, you may be at a slightly high risk for a heart attack. But overall, I think as long as you're getting the adequate amount of sleep, despite you having an unusual sleep schedule, it limits the amount of damage.
Okay, and since we're talking about sleep, I will ask one more question around that. What if you are not quite meeting that 8-hour sleep requirement during the week, but you catch up on the weekend? Are you fulfilling it all in all throughout the week, or does that not really count?
Another great question. To be honest, I would say it's probably not ideal. There's something called like sleep debt, or so you're trying to catch up on the weekends, but you still have during that week, suboptimal sleep patterns, which will put you at an increased risk for cardiac disease.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just comment. I agree with what Dr. Nona said, everything he said. The sleep is the time when your body basically repairs the damage that you do to it during the time you're awake. And so it requires two things, a certain length of time and a certain quality of the time that you have. And you need both. Now, what I said in my slide was sort of the average. There are significant deviations, normal deviations in people's need for sleep. Some people are perfectly healthy at 6 hours of sleep, and others are perfectly healthy at 9. But once you start getting out of those areas, as Dr. Nona said, there is a problem. If you're sleeping 12 hours a day, then there's something else going on. This is not a good sign for you unless you've had some kind of event that obviously triggered it. You're up for the last 5 days or something like that. But if you're doing it habitually, there's something going on that needs looking at.
Okay. Let's see. So Hannah, there are a lot of people asking about your recipe, and yes, we will include that when we share the email, and it should come out later this week. So hopefully by Friday, and Hannah's recipe will be included, and I will include a link to her demo, and then we'll also include the resources that Dr. Smith shared, including his Why We Sleep book suggestion. So Hannah, we do have a question. Would instant potatoes work as a thickener in place of cornstarch?
Theoretically, yes. It would be better to use potato starch though, because that's a more equal comparison for cornstarch.
Okay. And this person is asking, is saturated fat still considered a major contributor to poor heart health?
Yeah, I mean, very good question. You would have to distinguish between saturated and unsaturated fats, but as a whole, you would want to limit, the amount of fat you're consuming. And I think if you kind of take a look at a lot of the references Dr. Smith provided in terms of the different types of diets, but whether it's Mediterranean, whether it's DASH, all those have an emphasis on limiting the amounts of fats you have and focusing on, healthy grains and other type of fruits and vegetables.
I agree. And I think that perhaps steering more to the, we have a lot of talk about polyunsaturated fats, but actually the monounsaturated fats, and speaking things like olive oil, avocado, that type of stuff, are actually pretty good choices. They do have some issues because they have a slightly lower boiling point. Hannah could probably comment on this, but as far as if you are going to include some kind of fats in your diet, I would recommend staying away from the saturated and kind of skewing more toward the monounsaturated.
Right, as Dr. Smith was saying, I mean, the issue with those higher or lower smoke point oils is that once you hit that temperature, they start to break down. They can create those cancer causing agents. So you do want to be pretty careful with that. Definitely cook, especially olive oil and those kinds of things. Lower temperatures are going to be better. You definitely don't want to stir fry something in olive oil.
No, you definitely don't want to do, thank you for clarifying that. These are not oils that you want to do what she did today on, with. You want something with a higher boiling point.
Okay, that's great to know. Let's see, for whole grains, Hannah, do you have a recommendation of a good whole grain bread? And there's a two-part question. Is whole wheat as the first ingredient a good sign that you're purchasing a healthy loaf of bread?
Yes, so this is what I tell my husband because he still has a lot of trouble finding the right bread when he goes to the store. So not only does it have to be the first ingredient, but ideally all of the ingredients are 100% whole grain something, because bread is very tricky. They will look like whole wheat bread and it'll look dark, but a lot of times it has molasses in it or some other kind of caramel color that is making it look like a whole wheat bread when in actuality it is not. So not only does the first ingredient need to be whole grain, but the second ingredient also needs to, because sometimes it'll be like 100% whole wheat flour, and then the second ingredient is still enriched flour. So anything that's going to be refined or enriched, ideally we want to try to limit those things just because they, if it's refined alone, it has most of the nutritional value taken away from it. And if it is enriched, they've added some vitamins and minerals back in, but definitely not added back in the fiber, the healthy fats, the polyphenols, all those great things about it. So what we typically tell our patients is that we're recommending Ezekiel bread, which is going to be a whole grain, also low sodium bread. That's going to be in the freezer section at the store because it has very limited preservatives. But in actuality, really just as long as it's a whole grain bread or a whole wheat bread, I honestly just buy whatever's on sale at the store. I mean, if you're going to be like best case scenario, you're going to make it yourself. And then you know exactly what's going in it.
Yes, definitely. And I'm sure your house would smell amazing too. I'm wondering, and I lost my train of thought. 1 second here. Hannah, so the two words you said, so enriched.
And refined.
Yes,
Yeah.
so enriched and refined are two words. When you see those on your nutrition label, you should probably put it back on the shelf.
Right. We want to try to limit those as much as possible.
Got it. Okay, so we have a few people who have some trouble walking, and they may be in a wheelchair or they may have some knee issues and can't walk long distances comfortably. Are there upper body exercises that we can do that will also contribute to heart health?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a great question. I mean, any type of physical activity, any type of movement is going to contribute overall to heart health. So patients who have arthritis, any type of water aerobics or swimming are a little bit more gentler on the joints. And if you're confined to a wheelchair, I think any type of, upper extremity weight exercise, whether it's, light barbells or anything just to kind of keep the activity going, definitely has potential for improving that cardiovascular health.
Okay, perfect.
We have a lot of success in cardiac rehab with therabands as well for upper body exercise. These are elastic things that you can stretch or tie to a door, for example, to do these kinds of motions or this kind of motions or behind your back or whatever. And they lend themselves nicely to people in wheelchairs or who are not able to walk at a good distance.
Okay.
And they're cheap. They're inexpensive.
Yes, that's true. Great. So let's see. Is there a limit to caloric intake for heart health? And I would assume this is very different if you're following a whole foods plant-based diet versus a typical American diet. Can you talk about those calorie limits that we should be hitting each day?
So Dr. Smith and Dr. Nona may have a different recommendation, but typically what I encourage patients to do is, since it's going to be different for everybody calorie wise, is that we really want to try to focus in on what we call low calorie dense foods first. So focusing on eating whole fruits, vegetables, unrefined complex carbohydrates, which are going to be those whole grains, starchy vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and then the whole wheat bread, as well as my personal favorite, which are going to be our beans, peas, and lentils, those legumes, If you ask any of my patients, I tell them every day, just eat more beans. So by focusing in on those low calorie dense foods most often, then we find we don't really have to worry about calories as much, and it makes it a lot less overwhelming and a lot easier to adapt to those lifestyle changes.
I couldn't
Yeah,
agree
I would-
more. In fact,
yeah.
I'm sorry, the Pritikin diet that we use in our intensive cardiac rehab program doesn't even look at calories. They look at calorie density. And that's like the difference between filling your stomach entirely full with lettuce versus a couple teaspoons of oil. You take a calorie dense item and you're going to almost be guaranteed to gain weight. You use low calorie density, as Hannah said, and you're almost guaranteed to lose weight. I don't even recommend counting calories. I think it's, I won't say it's a waste of time, but it complicates things dramatically. Just pick a dietary pattern that is good, and you will automatically, well, depending on your weight to start with, but if you're overweight, you will automatically lose weight.
Dr. Nona, did you want to add something to that?
No, I was going to echo what Dr. Smith said. So he said it a lot more articulately than I would have said it. So.
Yeah, that is the nice thing about the whole foods plant-based is you can have seconds without any guilt, right? Okay, it looks like, let's see. Do you have a recommendation for a substitute oil, since olive oil is not recommended for stir fry?
I mean, the water is going to be the best one, but what we tell our patients is mostly canola oil is going to be the recommendation because it has the lowest amount of saturated fat. It has only about 7% saturated fat, and it is going to have that higher smoke point. So it's going to be more stable at those higher temperatures, but water is not going to cause any kind of cancerous components at all. So
Excellent. And for a plant-based diet, that we always seem to get this question, do the plant-based diets include the popular meat alternatives that are on the market? So you have Impossible Meat, Beyond Beef, some of those that you can find in the grocery store. Can you include those if you move to plant-based?
So my favorite thing to say to my patients is that vegan does not equal healthy. These plant-based meat alternatives, what I find that these manufacturers have done is that they've tried to make their product appeal to meat eaters. And in doing so, they have made them quite unhealthy. So like, for example, Impossible Burger for a 3-ounce serving has 10 grams of saturated fat, and that is coming mostly from added canola oil for texture. It also has 430 milligrams of sodium per that 3-ounce serving. So it is by no means a healthy choice. And we find that those processed plant-based meats are really just as bad as processed meats.
Okay, I have heard some of the lifestyle medicine physicians say that maybe you can use them as a transition food if you're moving towards a plant-based diet. Is that something that you would advocate for, or do you think cut out meat completely and move forward?
I think the best thing is that you can do is what you can do. So like I tell my patients, then when they ask me about like leafy greens, for example, what's the best leafy green to eat? And I can say kale all day, but if you're not going to eat kale, then that's not the best leafy green for you. If you're going to eat leaf lettuce, then that is the best leafy green. So if eating those plant-based meat alternatives is the only way you're going to kind of start to shift your eating patterns, then that's a great first step. Everything we want is we're just trying to gradually progress one more step at a time in a healthier direction.
Okay, perfect. We're gonna go back to exercise for a few minutes. A few more questions came in. So we have someone who, she listed a whole bunch of activities she did today: walking, a virtual cardio class, stretch classes, and doing household tasks, including taking care of 3 cats and a mouse, but only managed to get 8,300 steps. So should we be counting steps, or are we looking more at like that 8-hour mark where we're standing for longer periods of time versus actually hitting 10,000 steps?
I put a big emphasis on the number of steps, and I put a conscious effort on seeing where you are throughout the day, and adding whatever activities you are to hit that conscious step. Because sometimes we have a tendency to overemphasize or exaggerate in our own mind how much we're physically active. So I think by doing the steps, we somewhat have an objective measure to kind of hold us accountable and make sure we're staying active. So I would put a strong emphasis on the number of steps.
Yeah, I would agree. That's the most common and easily accessible way of assessing your activity. Now, granted, there are what you described, she probably is doing some sort of aerobic exercise that doesn't involve stepping. So I wouldn't, be terribly upset about that. I mean, I go out and swim, and that doesn't register on my steps. But there are other types of activities. But I think if you're looking at some sort of objective thing that you can track and measure literally minute by minute, Dr. Nona's right. It's the step tracking that's the best. And it makes you feel any better. They checked cardiology fellows and thoracic surgeons, and they were around 6,000. So that makes you feel any better. I guess the surgeon standing and doing a 4-hour procedure didn't count for much as far as the steps go.
So we're in good company.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any snack recommendations for a plant-based diet?
Sure. We just talked about snacks a couple weeks ago at cooking school. So always whole fruits are a great first choice. They're super easy to grab. I mean, literally nothing is easier than just grabbing an apple and going. If you're having, issues maybe with blood sugar stabilization, pair those quickly absorbable carbs like fruit with some source of protein as well. And that protein is more difficult to digest, so it slows the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream and can help stabilize those blood sugar levels. So like an apple with some Greek yogurt is great. I like to make like a dip with Greek yogurt and peanut butter powder and vanilla extract and cinnamon. And I dip my apples in that, and I think that's really good. Veggies, always a great choice. You can dip that in like hummus. Again, you want to be careful with like store-bought hummuses because they can have a lot of sodium and quite a bit of added fats as well. But definitely a homemade hummus, or there's lots of recipes online for like homemade bean dips from other beans as well. I was experimenting with like a chocolate hummus a couple weeks ago using black beans and cocoa powder, and it turned out really good. What else can we do? We can do like wasa crackers. If you are not gluten-free, wasa crackers are a rye-based cracker that is whole grain. You can do that with some like low sodium or no added sugar or peanut butter, or you can put hummus on that. You can do air popped popcorn is always going to be a great choice. Like a chia seed pudding. They're getting pretty popular right now. You're going to get a lot of soluble fiber, a lot of healthy fats from the chia seeds in that chia seed pudding. It's surprisingly good. It looks kind of weird, but it is surprisingly tasty. What else can we do? Those are just a few ideas.
They sound amazing. So when you switch to a plant-based diet, is there a concern with maintaining a healthy weight in terms of losing too much weight? It sounds like one of our listeners here is concerned about her sister because she's lost quite a bit of weight and is now under 75 pounds and is limiting her fat intake. Is that something that you've had your patients experience?
Personally, no, I have not had that experience. Yeah, that one sounds pretty extreme. Like switching to a plant-based diet probably, I mean, it would depend on what weight she started out at, but being 75 pounds as an adult is a pretty low weight, and that's pretty concerning.
Okay. Dr. Nona, did you want to add something to that?
No, yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think with all transitions, ideally with a plant-based diet, you'll have a mild reduction in your weight, but I think we also would have to differentiate between pathological weight loss and make sure there's not another process going on.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe she should check in with her primary care physician as a start and figure out what else might be happening. Okay, we talked about inflammation in the presentation. Can you discuss a little bit how that will impact heart disease?
Yeah, so we're as we learn more about heart disease, we're learning that there's more than just the traditional risk factors, and now there's a lot of data to support that underlying inflammatory conditions and underlying inflammation is a risk factor for cardiac disease and for coronary artery disease. So we now have some additional testing that can be done to measure inflammatory changes in the body, but we also want to make sure that we limit any type of inflammatory change with the body. And if inflammation is a natural part of the body, but there's things we can do to take steps to minimize that. So changes in sleep pattern can lead to inflammatory changes. There's some European data to support that. High stress environments can lead to chronic inflammatory changes, as well as some of us may have some underlying inflammatory conditions, whether rheumatologic, whether other that we should be looking to address, because that always will lead to a higher risk of coronary artery disease. So it's basically overall approach is trying to minimize the body's inflammation to prevent long-term heart disease.
I agree with Dr. Nona. It's more and more looking like a lot of these things that we talk about, the old hardening of the artery paradigm is really related more to inflammation at the level of the small vessels. What's very interesting in our cardiac rehab, in our intensive cardiac rehab program, is at about 2 weeks of the program, we start getting notes on that whiteboard I showed you at the end, saying my joints feel so much better. I have so much more flexibility. I don't have the pain anymore. And so you can actually track what Dr. Nona is referring to, blood tests that look at inflammation, and you'll find that with the start of a plant-based diet and exercise, they will go down dramatically fast. And I'm talking about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. So you measure some inflammatory blood test, and 2 weeks after you start intensive cardiac rehab, it'll be normalized in many patients. So it's something that can be done very quickly. It's a very quick benefit that occurs from adopting this type of exercise, plant-based diet, and better sleep.
And to your point, it impacts a lot more than just your heart. So if people are finding
Absolutely,
yeah, and all kinds of.
we have people that do still have, in one sense, inflammatory bowel disease. You might know it as ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, and they get better on going through cardiac rehab. And we're not obviously treating their inflammatory bowel disease, but it gets better. Same with rheumatoid arthritis. Same with osteoarthritis, actually, as well.
That's wonderful. We do learn, speaking of IBS, we do learn to have a colonoscopy at a certain age. Is that the same for cardiology? Is there a certain age where we should all see a cardiologist, or do you only see a cardiologist when you have a heart event?
That's a great question. I think, in the last 10 to 15 years, the field of preventive cardiology, which is basically assessing the individual's risk and seeing if there's any additional testing that needs to be done, has really morphed into play. But what's unique with cardiology is a lot of the preventative measures are also being done by the PCP. So the primary care doctors, looking at your high blood pressure, your hypertension. They're also checking your cholesterol. So, I think a lot of it is knowing your numbers and preventing your risk for heart disease. So similar to having a colonoscopy, we should all be knowing how our blood pressure is doing, knowing what our cholesterol is doing to prevent a heart disease or heart attacks. And there's also additional testings that you can talk to your cardiologist to kind of better assess your cardiac risk and better assess any screening for heart disease. And that's a very individualized, tailored approach.
Okay. This is an interesting question, and I've never heard of this, but it looks like one of our participants here has a PIG valve since 2017, and they're wondering Is there anything that can be done to prolong the pig valve? And are there any signs to let them know when it needs to be replaced?
Yeah, so with the pig valve, commonly known as a bioprosthetic valve, usually these patients are placed on aspirin 81 milligrams. So keeping aspirin on a daily basis will help, maintain the patency of the valve, as well as decreasing inflammation. And, so obviously not smoking, obviously controlling your blood pressure, controlling your cholesterol. All those will help make sure the valve kind of maintains and is able to do its function. And also with your cardiologist, there's, routine screening of ultrasounds of the heart, otherwise known as echocardiograms, that will allow the physician to see how that valve is functioning and if there's any changes to the valve that would require any type of interventions.
Okay, that's so interesting.
There's one other
Yeah.
risk factor that more and more cardiologists are doing in people with valvular heart disease, and that's a special type of cholesterol test called Lp(a). This has a high correlation with valvular heart disease, and more treatments are forthcoming in the near future to really attack this type of thing. It's a specialized cholesterol test, but it should probably needed to be done once in a patient's lifetime to see if they have an elevated Lp(a). And that can be done through the primary care doctor as part of a routine cholesterol screening. It's very simple, just a simple blood test that you can add on.
Okay, and for screening purposes, are what we're talking about tonight, so this whole food plant-based diet and some other lifestyle changes, are those helpful if heart disease is part of your genetic makeup versus maybe your lifestyle?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So, the way I like to think of it is, some of us may be more prone to heart disease or heart attacks. So regardless of where we fall in that spectrum on predisposition, any type of healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, healthy exercise will help mitigate those risks. So it's more of a spectrum how I see it, and we all fall in an individual part on that spectrum, and we all have a different predisposition, but anything we can do regardless of our predisposition to help us lower our cardiac risk is beneficial.
Excellent. So Hannah, we have one person who says they love your glasses, so I thought I would share that with you.
Yep. They change color in the sun.
Oh, that's fun. That's really fun. So Hannah, what about intermittent fasting? We have several questions about that. Is there a benefit? Is there a risk? What do you think about that?
It really depends on the person, because I see intermittent fasting abused a lot. So, I've worked with people in the past where it's like, okay, I'm going to do intermittent fasting to lose weight. I can't eat until noon today, but as soon as noon hits, they're eating pizza and wings and like junk. So in that sense, it's really just not helpful at all. And some people we hear, don't eat after 7 p.m. But more so, I like to tell people to eat when you're hungry. You just want to choose a healthy option to eat. Like somebody like me, for example, I do work out pretty regularly. I eat mostly plant-based. I'll eat like 5-6 times a day. So whenever I'm hungry, I eat something. I just try to make healthy choices. So we're choosing to, have breakfast instead of skipping breakfast. Like Dr. Smith was saying, it is very important to have breakfast, because a lot of intermittent fasting, you're skipping breakfast and you're really restricting that eating window to a very short amount of time. So the best thing that I can think of is just eat when you're hungry, just choose something healthy, because then that's going to prevent binging and feeling like you're being overly restrictive with your eating habits.
Okay, and if we do, so if we're recommending not to skip breakfast, can you do something like a bagel and cream cheese? Is that a possibility? I know there are some plant-based cream cheeses, but I don't know if that goes back to what you were talking about with those plant-based meat options or the substitutes.
Yeah, so any kind of cream cheese like that's going to be pretty high in saturated fat, even if it's plant-based. A bagel if a whole wheat bagel is going to be a better option than a refined bagel. But like a lot of people will put peanut butter on them. That might be a better option. One of the best options is always going to be oatmeal. or I like to do like whole wheat toast with some egg whites and maybe some avocado. I'm a big hot sauce fan, so I'll put hot sauce on that too. So really, you just want to make sure you're getting those carbohydrates and proteins together.
Okay, it's so interesting. A lot of people will say, but if I cut out meat, what am I going to eat? And I mean, you've just listed so many amazing options. I want to go upstairs and make right now. It looks like we have someone who has cardiomyopathy due to chemotherapy. Is there anything that she can do to make that better?
So with, cardiomyopathy, that means, you have a weak heart, and there's multiple causes for a weak heart, one of them being chemotherapy. Usually when you see a cardiologist, they will put you on a multitude of medications, known as guideline-directed medical therapy. It's a combination of 3 to 4 medications. And with appropriate medications, that may help the heart get back to normal in terms of its function. It's also important, to stay as active as possible and continue to have a appropriate diet. But usually the mainstay of treatment for these cardiomyopathy would be, a combination of heart protective or cardiac protective medications.
Okay, and so we're right at 8:17. There are a lot of questions. If you all are okay staying on for a few more minutes, I will fire off a couple more. But I did want to say overall, there are several questions that talk about different issues with vigorous exercise. So one person talks about going into tachycardia when they do any kind of cardio exercise. Someone also mentioned that they suffer from, is it POTS syndrome? Following a bout of COVID. And so they're having a lot of trouble, even just, taking their garbage can out at this point. Is there anything you can recommend for people who are experiencing some of those things, or is it best to maybe talk to their cardiologist or their primary care physician and work out a plan that works specifically for them?
Yeah, I think, obviously everyone with individual, conditions, it's probably best to seek individual treatment. But as a rule of thumb, you probably want to, do a more gradual build up in terms of exercise and, allow the body to adapt. With that POTS syndrome, or it's basically a postural tachycardia syndrome, that we see oftentimes after a viral illness or, with the COVID phenomenon, we see it. And that's something that there is some lifestyle changes that can help with that, as well as there's some medications. But I would, advise the patient to seek care with one of their either primary care doctors or cardiologists to kind of help guide treatment and guide therapy.
Okay, so it doesn't mean.
Yes, for the POTS situation, there actually are some exercise programs that will obviously, as Dr. Nona said, do it in a more gradual fashion. And in fact, there is a post-COVID clinic here at IHA and Trinity that individual could seek out as well.
Yes, and
as far as the other patient that gets tachycardia when they exercise, that probably needs further evaluation on an individual basis. That's not necessarily a normal function and may or may not be helped by just continuing to exercise. In fact, they may be putting themselves at some risk and they need to be evaluated for that. There are some simple tests that could be done.
I'm sorry, Dr. Smith. It sounds like the cardiac rehab would be a nice place to kind of get started on any kind of a physical plan if you're worried, because you would have that constant monitoring, or you'd have people there helping you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it would. And the references that you're going to put up or include have a link to the intensive cardiac rehab program. It is covered by insurance if you have the proper qualifying diagnosis, and I won't list those at this time, but you can certainly call and they'll be happy to walk you through the process. Also, you can seek out Dr. Nona and his colleagues at Michigan Heart, and we also have I think 9 other board certified lifestyle medicine providers besides myself that are seeing patients in the IHA network. So there are resources for that in those materials you will distribute.
Yes, definitely. I will include all of those contact information pieces. And we do have several locations for Michigan Heart. where you can see a provider and get some help with that if you're worried in any way, shape, or form. And then there are a couple of stent questions. So some people are wondering, how did I say it wrong? Stent.
Yep, you said it right.
No, you said it fine. You're fine.
Our participants are always much smarter than me, so sometimes I trip over their questions a little bit. So we have a couple of people asking questions about that. And is that something that has to be replaced at any point once it's in?
No, for the most part, the stent stays in place. There are usually, when you have a stent in place, you're put on a couple of medications to help with the stent patency or keeping that stent open. But these stents are not, immune to the natural body phenomenon of inflammation and high cholesterol. So these stents can close off if they're left, unchanged with any type of lifestyle interventions. I think that's what Dr. Smith was referencing, was saying this is, a stent is almost putting a temporary phenomenon. We have to work on diet, exercise, controlling the underlying pathologic process of coronary artery disease to keep that stent open and prevent other blockages in the heart.
Okay.
I agree. The stent basically is medicine. We have something called a palliative procedure. It buys you some time. It can be absolutely life-saving in the right circumstances. So please don't misunderstand my comments, but it doesn't address the underlying process that got you there in the first place. So if it were me and I had a stent, I'd be very grateful and I'd be very happy with the results. But I would look and ask myself, how did I get this to this place in the first place? So what can I do to prevent it from happening again? And doing this for some 40 plus years, I can't tell you the number of patients before we got into more lifestyle medicine emphasis that I would see back for a second, a third, a fourth stent. And so we have to address the underlying process. We're just buying time with this. And it can, as I say, be life-saving. It's very important to do this. But look at the underlying process and treat yourself.
The goal is not to have a stent, right?
Correct.
Be nice not to have
or once you have one, not to have a second
one. Exactly.
Okay, Hannah, my downfall is always a salad dressing. I make this amazing bowl of vegetables and then I ruin it with salad dressing. Are there any healthy salad dressings that you would recommend or that you like to use?
Yeah, you're definitely not alone in that. So first step is really just going to be honestly paying attention to portion sizes on those salad dressings. A lot of time that serving size is only 2 tablespoons, which is not much dressing at all. So that could be a good first step. Like if you're one of those people that they pour the salad dressing all over their dress or all over their salad, then step one is just being a little bit more mindful of portion sizes. Now, as far as like store-bought salad dressings go, Skinny Girl's not too bad, the Skinny Girl brand, but a lot of them do have a lot of saturated fat, a lot of sodium, a lot of added sugars as well. One of my personal favorites is honestly just balsamic vinegar. I will get like flavored balsamic vinegars. One of my favorites is like I have a spicy mango white balsamic that I put on salad, and I like that just by itself. But you can make your own homemade dressings that are going to be a lot healthier. I would caution you though, because a lot of them will call for quite a bit of olive oil or some other kind of oil in them. You can always cut that amount back to make them healthier, or omit the oil completely and do a more vinegar or like citrus-based dressing instead.
Okay, and there are a lot of questions about avocado oil as a replacement for olive oil when cooking, but it sounds like you really want to steer clear of any oil.
I mean, ideally for optimal heart health, because all oil is fat. Even if it's good or bad, it's all going to add some amount of saturated fat into our diet, and it's all going to be pretty high in calories as well.
Okay, so I want to ask just a couple more questions here. Is there anything that can be done to reduce existing coronary artery calcification?
So for the most part, I would say, coronary artery calcification, it's a chronic issue. The main goal would be not to reduce it, but to prevent it from getting any worse. So I think, people sometimes get some screening test called a coronary artery calcium score, or they notice that they have coronary artery calcifications on a CAT scan that was ordered for another reason. I say for the most part, that score kind of stays with you, and your main goal is to prevent that score from getting higher or prevent more coronary calcifications. In some instances, it may reduce slightly, but it would very rarely completely disappear.
Okay. Okay, so I saved my favorite question for last. Somebody is wondering if they get more than one dog, is there an added benefit to their heart health?
I honestly don't know. The study that I referenced was done with dog owners, and they didn't specify whether they had 1, 2, 3, or 4. Having had one dog at one time and having 2 dogs at one time, the benefits are not necessarily additive. 2 dogs can be a handful, and so you may increase your stress level by 2 dogs. But no, I can't answer that question. If 2 dogs make you happier and more content, go for it. In fact, get 3 if you want.
Yeah.
Whatever makes you happy.
That's my takeaway. I think each dog is 25% increase in heart health is what I'm going to tell my husband was the takeaway.
There we go.
tonight.
There we go. Yeah.
Okay, we have some questions about the upcoming webinar that Dr. Smith mentioned. So that is February 22nd. You can access this sign up link by going to ihacares.com/Wednesday Wellness. I will also include a link to sign up for it in your follow-up email. So no need to vigorously copy down any information. If you can wait a day or so, you will have an opportunity to click and register right in your inbox there. So, and again, we will include all references that Dr. Smith shared in his presentation. We will include Hannah's wonderful recipe, as well as a link to her video, and we will include contact information for Dr. Nona and Michigan Heart and all of their locations, as well as Hannah's location there in Livingston. So I think we have over 100 questions. I think we've done a pretty good job of answering most of the main topics or the common themes in there. And we will, hopefully you'll be able to get answers to the rest of your questions by looking at some of the resources and talking with your own personal physicians. So thank you so much to all 3 of you for joining us tonight. This was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.